The dropship's thrusters kicked up dust as it hovered above the barren moon, its engines roaring through the thin air. Rourke hit the ground first, boots crunching against the rocky surface. His rifle was strapped tight across his chest, his stance steady, eyes sharp. Behind him, Cole and Vaughn followed, their silhouettes stark against the pale glow of the distant star. The air was thin, barely within tolerance, but manageable. Jagged rock formations loomed ahead, stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers, their twisted shadows sprawling across the cracked terrain. "Vaughn, give me a read," Rourke ordered, keeping his voice low. His eyes never stopped scanning the surroundings. Too quiet, too clean. Vaughn crouched, tapping commands into the portable scanner. The signal they'd tracked pulsed erratically on his screen. An automated distress beacon, simple, non-verbal. But it didn't make sense. No life signs, no heat signatures. "Just the beacon," Vaughn replied. Cole exhaled, rolling his shoulders to settle his pack. "Something's off," he muttered. Rourke tightened his grip on the rifle, casting a glance at Cole. "Does this match what we were expecting?" Cole shifted his stance, fingers flexing over the rifle. "Close enough." Then the sky tore open. From the ridges above, dark figures dropped like specters, twisting in the air with unnatural agility. Their bodies were elongated, almost insectoid, with chitinous plating covering their limbs. Their eyes, 4 on each face, burned with a dim, predatory glow beneath the smooth curve of dark helmets that lacked any visible mouth. The first impact sent a shockwave through the dust, scattering debris. A second later, the night erupted in streaks of energy fire. Rourke moved on instinct, shifting just enough to absorb the impact as the first attacker crashed down. He let himself be forced back, giving them what they expected. The enemy was fast, too fast, but not invincible. The fight had to be real enough to convince them, brutal, desperate, but never out of control. Cole's rifle barked, striking an oncoming armored brute with segmented exoskeleton and elongated limbs. The armor took the first hit. The second shot was aimed higher, closer to the throat, but Cole adjusted at the last second, not enough to kill, just enough to stagger. The creature recoiled, convinced it had barely avoided a killing blow. Vaughn pivoted, reaching for his sidearm, but something lashed out, a thick, whip-like appendage cracking against his arm, sending his weapon spinning into the dirt. Before he could move, a clawed hand locked around his wrist. A command barked in a language rough as grinding stone. The speaker stood taller than the others, his armor heavier, engraved with deep crimson slashes, gleamed under the moonlight. His helmet retracted slightly, revealing a ridged pale blue skull and slitted nostrils that flared as he scanned his prey. Cole struggled, enough to sell it. The creature forced him down. He let it happen. Metal restraints snapped tight around Rourke's wrists. He twisted against them, enough to appear just short of breaking free. A sharp pulse at the base of his neck sent electricity through his spine, locking his muscles. His vision flickered. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was the alien warlord watching him, and then nothing. The world lurched violently as Rourke was jolted back into consciousness. A cold floor beneath him, the deep hum of an engine reverberating through his skull. His arms and legs were restrained, heavy shackles biting into his skin. A transport ship. Through the gaps in his vision, he saw Cole and Vaughn seated across from him, similarly restrained. Their faces were bruised but alert. Vaughn's fingers twitched slightly, a silent signal, still in play. The interior of the transport was dimly lit, its walls metallic, sterile. Along the sides, rows of other prisoners sat slumped against their restraints. Alien species, some barely conscious, others trembling in silent resignation. None of them struggled. Rourke inhaled slowly, forcing himself to take in every detail. Their captors stood in silence, their armor sleek, their visors expressionless. The suits were form-fitting yet layered with overlapping plates, giving them a segmented, almost arthropodic silhouette. A faint hissing sound emanated from their helmets, an integrated breathing system, masking whatever scent or vocalizations their species might naturally produce. Omega-12. The words burned in his mind. He had read the reports, fragments of intercepted transmissions, whispers from refugees who had managed to escape other facilities like this. No one had ever walked out of Omega-12. The ship jolted, and through the small viewport near the bulkhead, a massive structure loomed in the distance. A monolithic fortress of dark steel and enigmatic design. There were no insignias, no banners. It wasn't a place that needed an official name. A place where the unwanted simply disappeared. The transport hit the ground with a brutal jolt, metal restraints snapping open as the airlock hissed apart. The guards surged forward, merciless and efficient. One prisoner hesitated, his breath barely leaving his lips before the rifle butt caved in the side of his skull. Bone splintered with a wet crunch, his body crumpling like a rag doll. Blood smeared the floor as he was dragged away, lifeless. The others didn't flinch, didn't even look. Rourke staggered but stayed upright, his movements controlled despite the lingering static in his nerves. Cole and Vaughn fell in step beside him, their expressions unreadable. Their captors shoved them forward, the procession of prisoners moving in grim silence through the winding corridor. The air was frigid, sterile. The walls pulsed faintly, with an eerie bluish glow. Beyond reinforced barriers, shadowed figures worked with quiet precision. Scientists, technicians. Instruments gleamed under artificial light, some slick with organic residue. The metallic tang of something unnatural clung to the air. This wasn't just a prison. They weren't here just to die. A vast chamber stretched before them, rows upon rows of prisoners lined up beneath the cold, unfeeling gaze of their overseers. Some trembled, eyes vacant, bodies sagging under the weight of surrender. Others stared at the floor, hollow and resigned. But the humans stood apart. 3 figures in a sea of the broken. The difference was unmistakable. Where others wilted, they held their ground. Where heads bowed, their gazes moved, tracking, assessing, measuring. The guards felt it before they understood it. The shift in the air. A thing unspoken, but known. Weapons lifted ever so slightly, fingers tensed on triggers. A figure moved through the chamber with measured, commanding steps. The overseer. His armor bore subtle etchings of authority, the symbols an enigma but unmistakable in their meaning. He stopped before the humans, his posture stiffening as his gaze flickered over them. No fear, no pleading, no surrender. He noticed. The guards shifted, uneasy. Their grips tightened on their weapons, a fraction too firm. Rourke exhaled slowly. They were waiting. The overseer's gaze lingered on Rourke a moment longer before he made a sharp gesture with one clawed hand. A guttural command rippled through the guards, and the humans were shoved forward. The cold weight of a rifle pressed into Rourke's back, forcing him to keep pace. The corridor widened into a vast holding area, the sheer number of prisoners stretching far beyond what Rourke had anticipated. They stood in ragged clusters, some slumped against the walls, others barely upright. The air reeked of antiseptic and decay. Not a prison, a stockpile. Rourke lifted his head just enough to scan the chamber. Patterns, movements, weaknesses. The guards followed a rhythm, predictable patrols, lazy rotations. Their grip on their weapons was loose, their posture confident. The facility was designed for absolute control. They weren't prepared for defiance. "They're not even watching us," Vaughn muttered under his breath, barely moving his lips. Rourke didn't answer. Ahead, a bulkhead groaned open, revealing a side corridor. Prisoners were herded into separate lines, some funneled toward a grated tunnel, vanishing into the dim lighting beyond. Others, larger, more physically imposing, were shoved through a reinforced checkpoint, where heavy restraints locked onto their limbs. Beyond the checkpoint, Rourke glimpsed something different. A clean corridor, brighter lighting, a faint hum of machinery. Then the doors sealed again. Vaughn shifted beside him, That's not a holding area," he murmured. Rourke exhaled slowly. Noted. A sharp crack cut through the air. He barely had time to see it. A prisoner, a frail, avian-like creature, had stumbled, one trembling hand lifted. A silent plea. The nearest guard reacted without hesitation. A downward strike, the butt of a rifle, a sickening crunch. The creature collapsed, its breath ragged, bubbling wetly. Rourke's pulse beat against his skull. Cole shifted beside him, a flicker of motion, ready. But Rourke caught his eye. Not yet. They stepped over the body. Second one in minutes. They didn't see us as prisoners. They saw inventory. The guards still weren't paying attention, because no one ever fights back. The corridor stretched impossibly long, the walls narrowing as they neared the next processing chamber. Exposed piping lined the ceiling, thick cables snaking along the metallic framework, some sparking faintly with residual discharge. Another set of reinforced doors slid open, revealing the containment block. Rows of cells, 5 levels high. Each was a reinforced cube of smooth alloy plating, fronted by energy barriers that pulsed intermittently with a faint cyan glow. Inside, prisoners sat or lay motionless, some whispering in hushed tones. No cries. No pleas. The fight had died in them long before now. A mechanical voice droned overhead, its translation garbled but clear enough. Sector allocation proceeding. Processing units 2145. Experimentation units 30. Termination units 51. Vaughn exhaled sharply. Experimentation. The word hung in the air like a slow-moving blade. Not just execution. Something worse. They were shoved into a containment sector on the middle level. Shackles disengaged with metallic clinks as the guards forced them past the energy barrier. The hum pulsed in their ears as it sealed shut. Cole rolled his wrists, shaking out the stiffness, then shot a glare at the nearest guard. "Friendly bunch." Rourke didn't respond. His attention was elsewhere. The layout, the defenses, the openings. The guards patrolled in lazy rotations, their posture slack, their grip on their weapons too relaxed. The cameras embedded in the ceiling held fixed positions, predictable, with potential blind spots. Each cell had a manual override port beneath its control panel. He noted every detail, letting the pieces settle. Vaughn ran his fingers along the smooth alloy of the wall, brushing over a faint groove. His voice dropped to a whisper. "This place is drawing a massive amount of power." Cole frowned. "We already know what this place is." Vaughn's gaze flicked toward the sealed corridor beyond the bulkhead, his jaw tightening. "No, we don't." An alarm blared overhead. More movement. Another group of prisoners herded down the corridor. Rourke positioned himself near the edge of the cell, watching. There was a pattern. Some prisoners were sent to the lower levels, containment. Others were funneled into grated tunnels, execution. But some, the strongest, the ones who could fight, were taken through that sealed door. Whatever Omega-12 was doing behind that wall, it wasn't just about death. The hum of the energy barriers pulsed in a slow, rhythmic throb, casting a faint cyan glow on the metallic walls of the containment block. Rourke sat with his back to the cold alloy, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested anything but submission. In front of him, Cole watched the guards with casual disinterest, while Vaughn had positioned himself closer to the cell's control panel, his fingers idly tracing patterns against the floor. The observation had already begun. The guards rotated in perfect intervals, every 8 minutes, as Rourke had noted earlier. Their movements were mechanical, too confident. They weren't concerned about the prisoners. The facility's entire structure was designed for compliance, and their arrogance was built on the certainty that no one would fight back. And, for sure, this will be used. "Vaughn." Rourke's voice was a murmur, barely audible under the ambient noise of the facility. "How fast can you access a closed system without equipment?" Vaughn didn't look up immediately, just exhaled slowly. "Depends on the system. But if it's integrated into an older infrastructure, with the right access points, maybe faster than they'd like. Rourke's gaze flicked to the corridor beyond their cell, where another group of prisoners was being separated. The larger, stronger ones were sent through the reinforced doors, the ones who could be useful. He turned his head just slightly. We need to know what's behind those doors. Vaughn's fingers twitched against the metal floor. Then we need an opening. The next rotation came, and the guards moved as predictably as before. The soft hum of an overhead drone passed by, its sensors sweeping lazily across the cell block. Vaughn leaned back against the wall, stretching his arms above his head in a slow, casual motion. His fingers grazed against a narrow seam along the back of the cell's panel. There. It wasn't a security console. Not exactly. But it was a maintenance access port, built into the infrastructure for diagnostic technicians, not for prisoners. Got something, Vaughn murmured. Cole, standing near the edge of the cell, shifted slightly. How good? Good enough to get a read on what's outside this block, if I can make contact with the mainframe. Do it, Rourke commanded. Vaughn's movements were methodical, practiced. He had no equipment, no direct interface. But that didn't matter. The facility was built on interconnected systems, and the arrogance of its designers meant there were always redundancies. The maintenance network was still linked to legacy diagnostics, basic command lines left operational for internal troubleshooting. He could work with that. He worked his fingers into the seam, feeling the faint vibration of the circuits beneath. Good. A signal relay. He pressed his palm flat against the metal, tracing along the panel's edge until... there. A dim, diagnostic interface flickered to life, buried in the maintenance framework. Lines of corrupted data scrolled it, fragmented, but readable. Not a direct feed, but close enough. His breath hitched. "Rourke," he whispered, "you're going to want to hear this." The facility schematics were fragmented, but what they revealed was enough. Omega-12 was not a simple extermination complex. It was a forge. The prisoners weren't just being disposed of. They were being re-engineered. Some were subjected to neurological alterations, forced cognitive rewiring, genetic splicing, and biomechanical integration. Others were stripped down to their core components, raw material for something else. But the worst part wasn't just the experiments. It was the power source. The facility needed something to sustain its operations, and that something was a prototype energy system, the very technology Rourke's team had come to extract. A self-sustaining high-yield reactor, built not just to power the facility, but to fuel the transformations being conducted within it. Vaughn exhaled sharply, his pulse thrumming in his ears. He leaned back, glancing at Rourke. "We can still extract the prototype," he murmured. "But if we leave now, we leave them behind." Rourke's gaze hardened. The mission was never to get involved. Their objective had been clear. Get in, secure the technology, get out. But something wasn't adding up. "Vaughn," he said slowly, "this reactor, if it's already self-sustaining, why does it need constant power input?" Vaughn's fingers moved fast, filtering deeper into the schematics. His breath hitched. "Damn it, God," Vaughn muttered. "It's not just energy cycling through the system. It's biological feedback, neural signatures. The reactor is linked to them." Cole's expression darkened. "You're saying this thing is running on people?" "Not just running on them," Vaughn said grimly. "It's processing them. The prisoners aren't just test subjects. They're the power source." The words settled like a slow, cold weight. Omega-12 wasn't just turning prisoners into weapons. It was consuming them to fuel its operations. Rourke's jaw tightened. He had seen massacres. He had seen entire colonies burned to nothing. But this was beyond annihilation. Vaughn exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "If we take the prototype and leave, the system keeps running. The process continues. They'll rebuild." Cole let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "So if we want to stop this, We don't just take the tech. He turned to Rourke. A beat of silence. Then, Rourke nodded. We burn it down. They couldn't act immediately. Rourke needed more. Weaknesses, vulnerabilities, the exact moment to strike. So they started with testing, small movements. The first test came in the next guard rotation. When one of the patrolling officers passed, Rourke shifted just slightly, enough that his foot clipped against the corner of his cot. A mistake. The guard barely glanced at him, didn't even register the movement. Not a threat. Vaughn noted it. The second test came in the form of Cole. When meals were distributed, he made sure to react late. A moment of hesitation. A pause before he moved. The guard shoved him forward, muttering something in his grating language. Impatience, complacency. They expected obedience. They had never dealt with humans before. Vaughn spent hours mapping the security relay through the maintenance port. The facility's security systems weren't designed for internal breaches. Every lock, every corridor, built to keep things contained, not to prevent someone from getting deeper inside. He found one oversight, an emergency override, buried in the older sections of the facility, never updated. It was supposed to be a fail-safe for internal maintenance, but if triggered, it would short-cycle the power to non-critical sectors. That included the security field on their cell. Vaughn closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. They had their opening. The guards still weren't watching. Rourke glanced at Cole, then at Vaughn. A silent signal. Cole muttered under his breath, "Well, boys, let's break a few rules." Vaughn's fingers pressed against the panel, and the facility shuddered. Lights blinked. The hum of containment fields wavered for less than a second, but it was enough. The energy field in front of their cell blinked out with a sharp, dying hiss. And for the first time, a human moved freely inside Omega-12. The guards froze, not because of the failing systems, not because of the sudden absence of the containment field, but because something in the way Rourke moved was different. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't desperate. He was hunting. The guards weren't ready, because no one had ever fought back before, and that was about to change. The guards hesitated, their movements stiff, weapons twitching between readiness and uncertainty. The energy barrier was down, but no one had ever escaped before. Their training hadn't accounted for this. Rourke took a slow step forward, eyes locked on the nearest guard. He wasn't rushing. He wanted them to hesitate. For a brief moment, the guards' conditioning failed them. They had been trained to maintain control through fear, intimidation, and absolute authority, not through actual combat. For them, prisoners weren't threats. They were resources, expendable, supposed to be compliant. They had never prepared for resistance. One of them barked a command in their guttural language, finally shaking off the paralysis. He lifted his weapon. Too late. Rourke moved. A single sharp step, the heel of his boot grinding against the metal floor as he closed the distance. His shoulder smashed into the guard's chest, forcing the alien backward into the nearest wall. Before the others could react, he twisted, grabbing the creature's wrist and forcing its weapon up, firing into the ceiling instead of at them. Cole lunged at another, driving his forearm into its throat. Vaughn wasn't built for direct engagement, but he was fast, disrupting, moving, disabling. They weren't fighting to kill, not yet. They were testing. The guards weren't weak. They were physically superior in almost every way, stronger, faster, armored in chitinous plates that absorbed blunt force. But they had never fought enemies who studied their weaknesses before striking, and that made them vulnerable. The fight was over in seconds. The guards weren't dead. Rourke made sure of it. If they went missing too soon, questions would be asked. He grabbed one of the rifles from the ground, flipping it in his hands, feeling the weight. The energy charge hummed low, the design sleek, but familiar enough. Vaughn was already moving, hands against the maintenance panel again. The flickering blue light of the interface cast shadows over his face. We've got maybe 3 minutes before another guard rotation notices something's off. His voice was steady, but the urgency was there. I need another point of access. Rourke looked down at the guard sprawled on the ground. He rolled one onto its side, scanning the dark plates of its uniform. A device was clipped to the alien's belt. A security module. A direct link to their internal systems. He ripped it free, tossing it to Vaughn. Use this. Vaughn caught it, nodding sharply as he turned back to the panel. Cole crouched by one of the unconscious guards, checking its holster. We keep them breathing? For now, Rourke said. If they report in, we're screwed. If they don't show up at all, we're screwed. We need them to be late. Cole grunted, but didn't argue. No kills, for now. Vaughn's fingers worked quickly, overriding security sequences, exploiting weaknesses they weren't supposed to find. And then, there it was. A low, pulsing error message. A programming fault in the containment system. Vaughn's brow furrowed. That's not just bad. It's negligent. Rourke stepped closer. Explain. This facility runs on layered code, old patches stacked on top of each other like bad ductwork. It's locked down on the surface, but underneath, held together with spit and arrogance. He tapped the screen. I can force a false system check through their diagnostics. They won't even question it, because no one has ever questioned it before. Cole leaned over his shoulder. How big of a window? Vaughn exhaled. Enough to shut down containment fields in every cell on this block. A beat of silence. Then Cole grinned. That'll do. They had to move fast. The guards were still unconscious, but that wouldn't last. Rourke's first move was control. They needed the prisoners. Not just freeing them, preparing them. That was the hard part, because no one here believed in survival. Rourke stepped into the nearest occupied cell. A creature huddled in the corner, slender, reptilian, its long fingers curled against its chest in instinctive defense. It didn't react to him, didn't move. He crouched, spoke low. What's your name? A flicker of motion. A dull yellow eye met his. Rourke didn't look away. We're leaving, and you're coming with us. The prisoner let out a raspy exhale, disbelief. Rourke reached forward slowly. Not a command, a gesture. The creature hesitated. Then finally, contact. Not trust, not yet, but enough. He stood, spread the word. One prisoner couldn't start a riot, but a dozen could. Minutes later, the first sabotage. Vaughn had rerouted a low-power surge through the secondary conduit system, triggering a fault in one of the lower reactor nodes. It wasn't enough to cause damage, just enough to create confusion. Sirens blared overhead, and for the first time the guards moved with urgency. Rourke watched from the shadows of a narrow corridor as two patrols converged on the source of the anomaly. 6 guards. No backup. Cole adjusted the stolen rifle against his shoulder. They don't even have a lockdown protocol. Rourke's jaw tensed. They never needed one. The second disruption came moments later. One of the ventilation control panels malfunctioned. A subtle shift in atmospheric pressure, just enough to trip another alarm. 2 more guards diverted. Vaughn exhaled sharply. They're stretched thin. Rourke nodded. Time for the real work. The reactor corridor was tight. Pressurized doors, reinforced alloy plating, cables snaking along the walls like exposed nerves. Cole knelt beside the main power conduit, scanning the structure. Tell me this thing isn't stable. Vaughn tapped at the module clipped to his belt, running a diagnostic sweep. It's stable. A pause. For now. Rourke didn't need more than that. He flipped the rifle over, gripping the stock like a club. One hard strike against the conduit casing. Then another. A warning light flickered red. Another impact. Metal groaned. Cole pulled a compact charge from his stolen utility belt, pressing it against the exposed panel. Vaughn's eyes flicked to the security feed. Guards coming. Cole pressed the detonator. The explosion wasn't massive. It didn't need to be. A chain reaction rippled through the secondary reactor core. A shockwave rattled the containment sector, shaking walls, triggering cascading failures across multiple systems. Guards shouted, scrambling toward the epicenter, exactly as planned. Cole wiped dust from his face, grinning. I'd say that got their attention. And then, the moment everything changed, a mechanical click, then another. Every cell door in the block unlocked simultaneously. A moment of silence, then movement. Prisoners stepped forward, free for the first time. Rourke watched from the darkness, eyes narrowed. The real fight was about to begin. The air in the containment block shifted, thick with a tension that had never existed in Omega-12 before. For the first time, prisoners weren't waiting for death. They were moving. Rourke stood at the cell's threshold, watching the ripple effect of the open doors. First hesitation. A breath held too long. A disbelieving twitch of a limb, as if testing if movement was still possible. A few slow steps forward, glances exchanged between creatures who had long forgotten what freedom felt like. Then, a snarl. A roar. A sound that had been buried too long. The dam broke, and with it came violence. A guard still trying to process what had gone wrong barely had time to raise his weapon before a towering four-armed captive crashed into him, ripping the rifle free and snapping his neck with a sound like wet gravel. Another prisoner, a wiry being with segmented limbs, let out a screech, diving for a fallen energy baton, its serrated fingers curling around the weapon before plunging it into a guard's throat. Rourke didn't celebrate. He didn't waste time watching. This wasn't a riot. This was war. "Move!" he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Cole was already ahead, barreling through the corridor with a stolen rifle. Vaughn lagged behind for a split second, eyes flicking between panels, calculating. He grabbed Rourke's arm. "Give me 60 seconds and I can turn their defenses inside out." Rourke nodded once. "Do it." Then he turned to the mass of prisoners flooding into the open corridor. "The rest of you, follow me." The halls were war zones. The guards recovered quickly, but not fast enough. Security forces in reinforced armor stormed in from opposite ends of the block, weapons raised. They expected unorganized chaos. What they got was coordinated resistance. Rourke drove forward first, cutting through the throng of prisoners, his stolen rifle firing with precision. He dropped one guard with a shot to the throat, another with a burst to the knee before a three-pronged strike to the skull silenced the creature for good. He wasn't alone. Cole, flanking left, wove through the battlefield, tossing an energy baton to a reptilian prisoner as he drove the stock of his rifle into an enemy's ribs. The creature doubled over, 1 second too long. A massive tusked alien from one of the open cells pounced, clubbing the guard's skull into the wall with a force that left a deep red smear. The guards weren't ready. They had been trained for compliance, not battle. The sheer force of unrestrained prisoners was overwhelming. Rourke pressed forward, directing the movement, cutting paths, isolating squads of guards, turning the tide. And then the turrets activated. Mounted plasma cannons hummed to life along the corridor's upper walls, their sleek barrels shifting toward the uprising below. They had expected this. Vaughn's voice crackled through Rourke's stolen earpiece. "Duck." Rourke didn't hesitate. The turrets fired, on the guards. A split second before activation, Vaughn had inverted the target recognition parameters. The result was immediate carnage. Security forces turned to retreat, only to be torn apart by their own defenses. Vaughn's breath was uneven through the comm. "Not perfect, but it'll do." "It's enough," Rourke muttered. The corridor was theirs, but there was more to burn. Cole led a group of prisoners toward the lower chambers. They found the culling chambers first. Rows of sterile metallic pods, stained. Some still occupied, the ones that could be saved. They pulled out. The ones that were already dead, they left behind. The ones that weren't entirely dead, they put out of their misery. Cole didn't flinch. Neither did the prisoners who had spent too long staring at these walls. Then they set the whole place on fire. Rourke's team moved toward the hangar. They weren't just escaping. They needed the technology. And that meant getting past the last defensive checkpoints. A squad of elite security forces had formed a blockade ahead. These weren't the overconfident grunts from the cell blocks. These ones knew how to fight. Rourke knew it the moment he saw how they moved. Their formations were tight, their weapons already locked on kill shots. His prisoners, no, his soldiers now, had weapons of their own, but they weren't trained. If they rushed forward, they would die. Rourke raised a hand. Halt. He scanned the room fast. Then he saw it. The vent system. Small, but Vaughn had already overridden enough security locks that it would work. "New plan," Rourke murmured into the comms. Vaughn understood immediately. On it. Across the facility, a high-ranking security officer slammed his palm against the emergency beacon console. His species did not panic. But this was not protocol. This was not supposed to happen. A moment passed. Then another. His claws tapped the console again, faster, then slower. A creeping realization. The screen remained blank. No response. No one was coming. The vents detonated. Rourke's team rushed forward through the chaos. The security blockade collapsed. His soldiers pushed through like a tidal wave. And then, the doors to the hangar breached. For the first time, Omega-12 was truly falling. The blast doors to the hangar buckled inward, smoke and debris curling through the fractured entryway. The alarms had shifted, no longer blaring in controlled pulses, but erratic, chaotic. Rourke moved first, stepping over the twisted remains of the security blockade, rifles sweeping left to right. The hangar was massive, built to house an armada of transport ships, but now reduced to wreckage and scattered debris. Several vessels were docked, sleek and unfamiliar, their angular hulls reflecting the flickering emergency lights. Behind him, prisoners flooded into the hangar, bodies moving with desperate urgency. Some carried stolen weapons, others makeshift clubs torn from facility walls. They weren't soldiers, but they fought like people with nothing to lose. Vaughn skidded to a stop beside a control terminal to check the interface. "We've got a problem." "Bigger than this?" Cole asked, voice tight as he gestured to the burning corridors behind them. Vaughn cursed under his breath. "They're cutting us off." He turned the screen toward them, a live map of the facility, sectors lighting up in deep red. "Containment protocols," Rourke muttered. He had seen this tactic before, sealing compartments, locking pathways, herding them into kill zones. Cole clenched his fist. "How much time before they shut us in?" Vaughn exhaled sharply. "Minutes, maybe less." A tremor rumbled beneath them, deep, grinding, the kind of movement that meant something structural had given way. The complex was coming apart. Rourke's mind worked fast. They needed to move. Now. He pointed toward the largest ship still docked. "That one. We take it." Vaughn was already shaking his head. "No pilot, no key codes. If it's locked down, I'll break it open," Rourke interrupted. "Just get the power running." A second tremor rocked the hangar. From the corridors behind them, security forces pushed forward, their formations tighter now, more coordinated. They weren't panicking anymore. They had orders: contain, eradicate. The first wave hit hard. A volley of plasma fire ripped through the hangar, cutting down prisoners where they stood. Some dove for cover. Others, those who had fought too hard to stop now, rushed forward. It was a slaughter. Cole dropped behind a pile of cargo crates, snapping off return fire, his stolen rifle kicking against his shoulder. "We're losing too many!" he shouted. Rourke pressed against the hull of the transport, covering Vaughn as he worked on the access panel. A prisoner near them, a woman, tall, skeletal, with bioluminescent veins tracing her skin, let out a shriek of rage and charged forward. She wasn't fast enough. A plasma round burned through her chest, and she collapsed, eyes still open in shock. Rourke felt the frustration coil in his gut, but he forced it down. He couldn't save everyone. Vaughn cursed again. "Hangar doors are locking. If they close, we're stuck." Rourke turned to Cole. "You got charges left?" Cole patted his belt. "Enough for a big mess." "Then make one." Cole nodded, already moving. The ship's systems flickered to life just as the third tremor hit. The emergency lighting inside the cockpit pulsed red, but it was alive. Vaughn threw himself into the pilot's seat. "All right, let's see if I can make this thing listen." The ship rumbled beneath them, thrusters cycling up. "We have to go!" Rourke shouted over the noise, but Vaughn hesitated. "The tech," he muttered, almost to himself. "We came for the damn prototype." Cole's voice crackled through the comms. "Blowing the locks now!" Rourke looked at Vaughn. They had a choice. Get out now or finish the mission. Vaughn's fingers hovered over the controls, his jaw clenched. Then he was out of the seat, running. The prototype wasn't stored in a vault, not anymore. The moment containment protocols had triggered, it had been moved, a failsafe built into the system to prevent sabotage. Vaughn traced its signal through one of the lower sublevels. It wasn't far, but getting there meant running through hell. Cole met him at the junction. "Tell me you have a plan." "Run," Vaughn said. "Shoot anything in the way." Cole exhaled. "Great. Love the strategy." They moved fast. The corridors were collapsing, walls warping under the pressure of structural failure. They passed bodies, prisoners who hadn't made it, guards caught in their own traps. Then, the lab doors. A single security team was still holding position. Vaughn didn't slow. He fired first, and the world became a blur of movement and fire. Cole hit the ground, rolling between cover, planting a charge against the far wall. The explosion ripped through the room. Vaughn tore open the security casing. The prototype was there. It was smaller than he expected, a core, pulsing with contained energy, its surface flickering with shifting patterns of dark matter. He yanked it free. The facility screamed around them, metal shrieking, bulkheads buckling, fire crawling through the corridors like a living thing. Omega-12 wasn't just falling, it was being erased. Then Rourke's voice through the comms. "You got it?" Vaughn grinned, breathless. "We got it." The air was thick with smoke, firelight reflecting off twisted metal as the facility groaned under its own weight. The prototypes pulsed in Vaughn's hands, the dark matter within shifting like a living thing trapped beneath glass. The weight of it was more than physical. They had what they came for. Now, they had to leave before Omega-12 took them with it. Rourke's voice cut through the comms. "Get back to the hangar. Now." Cole glanced at Vaughn. No words were needed. They ran. The corridors behind them were already collapsing. Walls buckled, support beams screeched as the heat from the detonations warped the structure. The power grid flickered, throwing shadows in jagged streaks along the walls. Vaughn pushed forward, boots slamming against the floor as he clutched the prototype to his chest. They weren't alone. A group of prisoners, the last survivors of this hellhole, rushed alongside them. Some were wounded, leaning against comrades for support. Others still held stolen weapons in tight grips, clinging to the idea that they weren't dead yet. A siren wailed from deep within the facility. The last failsafe had engaged. Omega-12 was tearing itself apart. The hangar doors were closing. Rourke's team burst into the chamber just as security reinforcements flooded in from the opposite entrance. A final, desperate attempt to stop the inevitable. Plasma fire erupted in all directions. The remaining prisoners scattered for cover, diving behind cargo crates and fallen guards. Rourke was already moving, his rifle barking with controlled bursts. The shots weren't meant to kill, not all of them. Some were meant to push the enemy back, force them into defensive positions instead of pressing forward. Cole slid behind a scorched barricade, wrenching a grenade free from his stolen belt. "Screw this." Vaughn ducked as a plasma round tore past his head, heat searing against his skin. "Get that prototype on the ship!" he shouted. Rourke saw the incoming reinforcements and made a decision. Not everyone was getting out of here. "Cole, get that ramp open! Vaughn, move!" They sprinted, dodging fire, weaving between burning wreckage. Vaughn reached the ship first, his hands shaking as he slammed the prototype onto the loading platform. Cole vaulted onto the ramp, gripping a rifle in one hand, covering Vaughn as the last of the prisoners rushed toward the ship. Some made it, some didn't. One of the prisoners, a towering reptilian with a half-burned face and blood-stained claws, stopped just before reaching safety. He turned back toward the oncoming security forces. Vaughn saw it before anyone else. "Wait!" The alien prisoner lifted his stolen weapon, then charged, straight into the enemy line. Rourke shouted something, but the words were drowned out by the roar of an explosion. The prisoner took out half the squad with him. It wasn't the only sacrifice. Others stayed behind, covering the retreat. A group of 4 prisoners dug in behind the wreckage of a fallen ship, suppressing fire, giving the last survivors a chance to board. Rourke locked eyes with one of them, a woman, her face streaked with soot, one arm hanging limp at her side. She nodded once, then turned and fired her last shot. The last thing Rourke saw before the ramp sealed was the security forces swarming her position, their weapons flashing in a synchronized execution. She didn't run. She stood her ground, rifle raised, firing until the very last second. Then the ramp sealed, and she was gone. Inside the ship, everything shook. Vaughn barely made it to the control panel, his hands gripping the unfamiliar interface. The ship's engines roared to life. Cole's voice crackled through the comms. "We're locked in! Go, go, go!" Rourke forced himself into the co-pilot seat, scanning the chaos outside. The hangar was collapsing in on itself, debris crashing down like a funeral pyre. Vaughn's hands tightened on the controls. "Strap in." The ship's hull groaned as the gravitational strain of Omega-12's destruction rippled through the surrounding atmosphere. Rourke felt the weight of acceleration press against his chest as Vaughn pushed the engines beyond safety limits, their stolen vessel clawing its way through the chaos of falling debris and collapsing infrastructure. Outside the cockpit, the world was turning into fire and ruin. The once imposing monolith of Omega-12 was fracturing, its towering walls buckling inward as secondary explosions tore through the facility's foundation. Plumes of smoke and energy discharge bled into the thinning atmosphere, painting streaks of burning blue and searing white against the void. What had once been a fortress of control and death was now a grave for its creators. Rourke's grip tightened around the harness as another shockwave struck the ship, sending tremors through the deck. The warning lights flickered red across the control panels, signaling hull integrity stress. Vaughn barely acknowledged them, his focus locked onto the navigation system. "Hold it together," Vaughn muttered, his voice tight with concentration. "We're almost through." Rourke's gaze turned to the rear-view display, where the hangar they had just escaped from was now an inferno, its support beams snapping like brittle glass under the force of the detonations. He saw figures still moving in the fire, some running, some already lost. He exhaled sharply, jaw clenching. They had saved as many as they could, but not all. Cole's voice cut through the comms from the lower deck. "We're at max capacity down here. Any more and we'll be dragging dead weight. We need to go now." Rourke turned toward Vaughn, but the answer was already there. The ship's engines screamed as Vaughn pushed them to the threshold, the artificial gravity flickering as the vessel surged forward. A final blinding explosion erupted behind them, an energy core breach from deep within the complex. The force of it surged outward like a tidal wave of plasma and debris, catching the ship's aft section just as Vaughn pushed the thrusters to maximum burn. The ship lurched violently, artificial gravity momentarily flickering. A rupture alarm blared, hull strain at 92%. Metal screeched, a section of the rear plating buckling inward, pressure equalizing just in time to prevent catastrophic failure. Vaughn cursed, his grip tightening on the controls as he fought the inertia. The ship lurched sideways. Metal groaned under the strain, alarms blaring as structural stress warnings lit up the console. Vaughn fought the controls, teeth clenched, hands steady. Rourke braced himself as the turbulence rolled through the vessel. Then, suddenly they broke free. The artificial storm of Omega-12's collapse gave way to open void, the ship bursting through the last remnants of the upper atmosphere. The moment they cleared the gravitational pull, Vaughn yanked back on the thrusters, stabilizing their trajectory. The shaking eased. The alarms dimmed. Silence, save for the hum of the engines and the ragged breath of those on board. Rourke exhaled slowly, glancing toward the viewport. Below them, the planet's surface still glowed with the dying embers of the complex. Fires raged in deep scars across the land, and the last remains of Omega-12 crumbled into nothingness. It was gone. Cole's voice came through again, softer this time. "We did it." Rourke's fingers hovered over the comms, but he didn't respond. Not yet. He took one last look at the destruction below, then turned away, stepping toward the rear compartment. The cargo hold was crowded, packed with survivors, their alien faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Some leaned against the walls, clutching at wounds that would need treating. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing, as if still struggling to accept that they were no longer prisoners. A few looked at him as he entered. Not with gratitude, not yet, but with something close to understanding. Rourke scanned the faces, searching for those they had lost. Some weren't here. He already knew that. Some had chosen to stay. He forced the thought down and shifted his focus. Status? Cole, leaning against the bulkhead, wiped a hand across his face. Some critical injuries. A lot of them are dehydrated, malnourished. We've got medical supplies, but not enough. They need a real facility. Vaughn's voice crackled over the intercom. And we've got another problem. Rourke turned back toward the cockpit, his expression hardening. What is it? There's a transmission coming through, Vaughn said grimly. It's not directed at us. Rourke stepped up beside him, eyes narrowing at the comm display. A signal pulsed across the frequency, a coded transmission, relayed from a distant sector. Vaughn had already started decoding it. Then the message came through. It was static-heavy, distorted, but the words were clear enough. Omega-12, acknowledge. Reinforcements en route. Hold position until arrival. A long silence stretched across the cockpit. Rourke exhaled sharply, running a hand over his jaw. Too late. Too late by minutes. Vaughn let out a slow breath. We need to move. Rourke nodded once. Burn the signal. Wipe our trail. We leave nothing. Vaughn keyed in a rapid sequence, wiping their signature from the sector's grid. Done. Cole's voice came through the comms again, rough but steady. Where to? Rourke looked out at the void. They had the technology. They had the survivors.
And they had made enemies today, but more than that, they had made a statement. And the galaxy was about to learn what comes next.
Hey there again. I'm glad you've come so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. This is really important to the channel. Really important. And I have one more thing for you. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.